welcome. This breakout session deals with good practice in public-private partnership. My name's Simon Conway. I work with the advisory team in PwC Cayman. I've experience in advising governments in the UK and the government here on PPP, and a pretty broad range of PPP, I'd say, going from hospitals through to schools and roads and even aircraft carriers. So that's my experience. I'll introduce now the panel, who I would say quite a brave bunch. For some reason, there's a perception that procurement and PPP is a controversial topic in Cayman. I'm not sure why, but anyway, we're very lucky to have them. Tristan Hydes was introduced earlier, so you're all familiar with Tristan and his role with the Ministry of Dorla. We also have Alistair Swarbrick, who's the Auditor General in Cayman. It was a surprise to me to read that he's only been here since July 2010. I think based on the amount of press, one might have thought he's been here longer, but we're very, very lucky to have Alistair and to hear his frank views on what we're doing and perhaps how we could be doing things better. We also have Max Jones. Max is a civil engineer by training. He's been in Cayman and with the Department of Public Works for 30 years now. And Max has been involved in some of the more complex projects, long-term projects that government has undertaken, and therefore will be very useful in this discussion. And we have Jean Thompson, who, as you'll all be familiar with, Jean is in fact a third generation of a Caymanian family of entrepreneurs. And today, Jean is here in his role as representative of the Cayman Health City. And after we've gone through our initial discussion and Q&A with respect to procurement, Jean's kind of going to give us a presentation on the Health City and take questions on that. So given we're short for time, I'll give a very brief overview as to what we're looking at and why. Public-private partnership, I would define in this context as being essentially transactions where the public sector is leveraging private sector finance and expertise and resources. And that's a pretty wide definition, deliberately. And essentially what it often really entails is the private sector building, operating, financing, maintaining infrastructure assets. Why would we do that? Why is it important? Well, as we all know, throughout the Caribbean region, there's been chronic underinvestment in some of the key infrastructure assets, such as transport assets, ports, airports, utilities, water, tourism infrastructure. It's a common theme throughout the region and equally in Cayman. The reality is, we've got to get real about this. Governments haven't upgraded these assets. And the likelihood is they will not, because the complexity of the kind of assets we're talking about would require private sector expertise and finance. Now, is this suitable for Cayman? Well, Cayman is arguably the wealthiest country in the real Caribbean, but it has too much public debt. There's no doubt about that. And also there are contractors who are lining up to do business in Cayman. And equally, we're all aware of which assets, or we'll all have our own views on which assets are in dire need of upgrading in Cayman, such as the port, the airport, arguably a number of other assets as well, the roads network. So it may well make sense for PPP in Cayman, but we have to bear in mind how do we get there? Why is procurement so important? Well, in some ways it's a rather dry topic, but when you think about the fact that many of these PPP arrangements, we're talking about 30-year plus contracts, huge values, huge number of variables. Yes, when they're done right, they can drive economic development, but I've seen in the UK quite a number of examples of where they've been done wrong, where government has negotiated with far more astute parties than one would anticipate. And the reality is, in some of those cases, the government has lost their shirt And the people who always pays in the end is the public. So that's why procurement is important, in my view. So without further ado, I'll just move on now to some, I'll ask 3 questions of our panel, and then I'll open it up to the audience. Let's see, first question. We're all aware of key Cayman infrastructure, such as the ports, the airport, the road network, some utilities that have long needed upgrading and new investment. That hasn't happened. There's been a realization over time that perhaps triple P or outright privatization might work, but we haven't got there, albeit there's been a lot of public efforts to try and get there. So my first question to Tristan is why haven't we got there? What's going wrong?
Thanks, Simon. I thought I'd...
Sorry, Tristan.
I thought we'd agreed.
I'll give you your money back.
I think actually, you know, it's a number of factors, and one of them being when the economy, and I speak of this globally now, contracted. I think everybody got a little nervous, and we started to re-examine what we wanted to do in the projects and stuff like that. And because of that, I think we became more cautious and a lot of these projects, they're very complex. It's not that they're not going forward, it's just that people, you know, the public, it's very hard to see behind the scenes what's going on, and the amount of negotiations, I guess, for lack of a better term, that are being, that are involved. And so with that, I think it just takes time. In addition, they're also very large, you know, just by nature, infrastructure projects. It takes time for them to, there were not many of them, you know, you hear in the States a lot about, you know, rated to construction, but in a lot of these cases, they had to be developed from the outset. And to do that, there's a lot of time involved.
Any thoughts, Max?
You know, I think one of the realities is we haven't really done PPP projects before in Cayman to any great degree. So there's just locally, I think there's a lack of knowledge on how those projects operate. They are complex projects, and we do need to be sure that we have the correct accounting, legal, and technical expertise to move those projects forward. But I think although they are complex, the actual steps to move a PPP project forward are not so complicated. Government's main function is to define the actual project, the objectives and the goals of the project, so the private sector can then deliver different solutions on that. As I said, we've got to be sure we're hiring the necessary specialists. They are complex projects, and there's not a lot of experience in government in that area, and to some degree in the private sector here. Once we've established that scope, those goals and objectives, we can invite proposals on a competitive basis. PPP lends itself well to competitive procurement. And we move forward with evaluating the proposals and coming up with preferred bidders. So the actual steps to take, I don't think are particularly complicated, but it is the contracting processes are quite complicated. So I think in looking at why we haven't been successful, I think we have to look at those key steps to make a project successful. Clearly identifying the project at the outset, ensuring we've got the adequate expertise on board, and going through the best practice steps of achieving a PPP project. I believe they can work very well in the Cayman environment, but they have to be approached very carefully.
Picking up on the comments of both Tristan and Max, PPP projects do take time. There's no doubt about it. They are complex transactions, and there is an issue about ensuring that you have the right skills and capacity to deliver them. But from my perspective, there are a number of potential reasons. There's no one reason for things taking a longer time than planned or expected. Picking up on the issue of the objectives of the project, I think what we see is that there are sometimes the objectives and the goals of the projects are not well defined, or they keep changing as the projects move forward. There's sometimes no clear policy about what you're trying to achieve through PPP. For example, that was a case in the UK for quite a while in terms of how they were trying to use PPP or PFI deals, basically as a means to get infrastructure assets off the balance sheet, which was not the best objective at the end of the day. And in terms of clarity of the roles and responsibilities of the parties involved in the transactions, where does the role of the politicians start and stop in terms of where do the officials take the role forward? What is the role of the advisors and specialists to support the civil service in taking forward these deals? I think these are some of the key issues from my perspective that get in the way or impede the moving forward of some of these projects.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks. Yeah, in fact, that leads in quite neatly into the next question I was going to ask, because I suppose on the one hand, there might be a view out there, and we may have unrealistic expectations generally about how fast these things should happen. But there may be a view that legislation, regulation is getting in the way, or indeed one might take an opposing view and say we don't have enough or the right kind of legislation and regulation. We now have the framework for fiscal responsibility, and that's passed into law now in a form. And I guess my question to you initially, Alistair, is: do we have the right legislation and regulation? Is it fit for purpose in Cayman?
The legislation is not perfect. I don't know any legislation that actually is perfect, I have to be honest. It could be improved, it could be strengthened, it could be clarified. But from my perspective, it's not an impediment to moving forward the PPP projects in any way, shape or form. It doesn't prevent effective procurement of these projects. And my other perspective is that many jurisdictions, the procurement process is not completely legislated. It's just the key principles that it's based on competitive process, which is open and transparent, and certain limits are put in the legislation. There's no need to document the whole process. Part of the issue is, though, the government has no clear policies, processes, guidelines across the piece for which to use and follow. That's what came out in our report. Martin, when was it? Last year? Last year. You say it only came here in July 2010. It seems a lot longer sometimes, I have to be honest. So, the legislation is not a hindrance, not an impediment to moving forward these projects. It could be improved, could be strengthened, and could be clarified, and I think that will hopefully come in due course. But it's not, I don't think it's an excuse for not moving forward the projects.
Thanks. I saw you nodding there, Tristan. I take it is it more about getting the process right rather than the legislation? Yes,
I agree with we call him the AG, and I think it is about transparency, and also just following the procedure and getting that procedure correct. And he's right. I mean, government really doesn't have all of its procedures down. We did a project. I don't know when that was, Max, a couple of years ago, and the GOAP project, and that first started out as a P3. It morphed into something else, but again, no one really knew behind the scenes that the process was or the procedures were being followed, but we were, and it would have turned out to be quite a successful project, I think, either way.
Thanks. Okay, well, I'll just almost playing devil's advocate here then. We talked a bit about legislation and process. If I look around the region at what other countries are doing, and to be clear, these other countries within the region are our direct competitors in the tourism industry and the cruise ship, the overnight stays, and in some cases in finance. There appears to be more progress in terms of embracing Triple P, getting some of these major projects started. I mean, if we look at Jamaica, the road network, the high school proposed Triple P, the Bahamas, a new airport, and there's a number of others, Aruba and so forth. Now, is it the case that they're getting something right that we're not? Are we falling behind in that sense? I'll put that to you initially, Max. And
you know, clearly there is more work going on around the Caribbean with PPPs. I don't know personally, and maybe when we get to the discussion stage, some of the audience members might be able to contribute, how well those PPPs are being done. It's easy to deliver a project through a PPP, but the fundamental issue is you must get value for money through that process. Normal best practice is that you only go with a PPP if it does deliver value for money over the traditional process. If the traditional process delivers value for money, that would be your normal route. So yes, there is progress around the region. If they are doing it right, I think the things we discussed earlier, they're identifying the projects correctly, they're proving value for money before commitments are made, getting the right expertise on board to make sure we have the support to manage these projects well. But as I say, I'm not familiar enough with any of those projects to know whether that is all being done or whether indeed it's just pushing ahead with the PPP, and we will find out in due course whether value for money was really achieved. I don't know.
Yeah. And I might add, you know, I mean, Cayman, just to brag a little bit, I think Cayman is probably the strongest in the Caribbean in terms of what, you know, in the industry, sorry. And you know, maybe we should be further ahead, but then again, maybe being sound and strong in all its rights actually hinder us in some way. Maybe it is from the other perspective, you know, without the legislation or without with the lack of procedure. And I'm just theorizing now because I really don't know anything about those projects. I mean, we hear about the other projects in the other countries, but maybe it is easier to get it off the ground. It's just a matter of what's the result. We haven't seen that part yet.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, one could look at the airport in Turks and Caicos, which is essentially is becoming a failed PPP for various reasons, and perhaps that was Russia.
And then you've got the road in Jamaica that's, you know, some controversy going on there. So,
I think it is. You won't really know until you see the future costs of all these projects in the other regions, in the other countries in the region. Certainly, the Contractor General in Jamaica, Greg Christie, has certainly got some significant issues about some of these contracts. And for example, the deal that was signed in Guyana for the airport there was done behind closed doors. The public didn't actually know about it until it was reported in the Jamaican Gleaner. So, you know, there's a number of issues around some of these projects that are clear about issues about competition, transparency, and whether you're getting value for money. So I think we had to be careful in judging what's been achieved in other countries at this stage until we see the full costs, and they could have significant issues for their countries. For example, the UK, the Director of Government Property, last week talked about the eye-watering costs of some of the Whitehall buildings in Westminster, which were procured through PFI deals. You know, did they get good value for money? Probably not. They were just looking to get the assets off the balance sheet at the time.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to get it right, because we'll, you know, like you said at the beginning, I think if you don't, only the public will pay for it in the end. You got the one in Scotland, the Parliament in Scotland. That
I can tell you.
I don't even know what that costs.
That cost 450 million when it was planned to cost 50 million pounds.
There you go.
But then that was a classic case of certain politicians getting involved in the construction process.
Yeah, I think one of the key things there is, for all to be aware of, when PPPs do go wrong, they go spectacularly wrong.
Yeah.
There's probably more risk when they go wrong than with a traditional delivery. So we have to do that upfront work and make sure it's a sound project before we move forward.
And I think it's harder to pull back from them when, even if you see them going wrong, it's like, you know, you've spilt the bucket.
It's very hard. Having asked those questions, I'll just open it up to the audience now. Any questions? I think we've got a roving microphone.
Good morning. I'm old school, so I'm going to go way back when. I look at the airport, and I remember when we had a little shack, and Cayman was moving, booming, and we had a beautiful airport built. Now, in the process of building the airport at the time, I believe, had a 15-year plan. I don't have all the records, so, sorry, Sharon Scott. So I am not sure where we faltered there. But in the time that the airport was built, the size it was, and the 15-year plan to develop it, we had, Cayman was still developing a lot around on the island itself. We're having more tourists, people coming in daily, had different flights coming in, and we're extending on all these flights coming into the island. Now, I would say airport is what? The new airport is what, 20 years old? A little more than that?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Right.
82.
So at the end of the day, we had that plan for that 15-year plan to develop, to extend on it. The only thing we have really done so far is the little buildings outside and extend the car park. But what is affecting me in my thought is the other buildings surrounding it now that I believe government should have owned, that we're having warehouses and other things going towards the other side of the airport. So the airport is going to be locked in, and we still have not reached anywhere with it. Now, Mr.
Max.
Gentleman here from planning, Max Jones.
Public Works.
Don't know if you remember me. We come way back. I'm 20-something years in government. And I am saying to myself, the essential areas we have to look at definitely is the port and the airport. What is our plan still? Because at the end of the day, I am telling people, come to my island. Yes, when they come into the airport, we have not very much to offer when it comes to the immigration. We have extended now onto the departure lounge for immigration coming in. What are we going to do here? Are we going to go upstairs? I don't want to look at other countries, but every time you go to Miami, there's something building on. Miami is a whole Georgetown, Grand Cayman, the size of Miami International. Yes, we do have legislation, we do have PP, we have this, we have that, but at the end of the day, where are we going to start back? Because we have just built an airport and boom, we're not doing anything more?
Yeah, I think there's been a plan. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's been a plan for some time for the airport. There is a master plan.
Yes.
So how does that get put in place?
Because
which I guess is what we're talking about.
Right,
here.
because I'm saying, where are we going to pick up? You have just said, we have to do it at the right time, but how long is it going to take for it to be the right time? Because when we had money, when the government had money, and there's still all these condos and everything building up on the island, that is telling me that there are going to be more people coming in. If we build back another Hyatt, they knock that down and build back triple the size compared to Dart's Place and all those on the waterfront there, on the beachfront. We're telling people come. But when they come into the airport, 3 flights, 4 flights come in and we're choking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, airports are really good for PPPs because airports are one of the few things that, I had a professor once tell me that airports are one of the few infrastructure that never stops constructing. It's supposed to just keep rolling because no matter how much you plan, and I think that's part of the problem with the airport here, is that no matter how much you plan ahead, those future plans have to keep changing because it's a rolling thing. I think we did not the first one, but a master plan back in, I think it was 1997 or something like that. But I think it can be turned back to the civil aviation and the rest of the leaders that this is a very important issue that needs to be addressed.
It's interesting going back in time because my first project when I came to Cayman was to be project manager on the airport, and Mr. Heberards, the contractor, sat right there as well. And quite amusing that back in those days when we were building that airport, we were laughed at for the size of the facility we were building, saying it's ridiculous, we'll never use this, and here we are 20 odd years later, and it's too small. So it obviously back in the early 80s, or 1980, I guess, when that was being designed, it probably would have been almost impossible to project the growth going forward. But that's, I think, part of the discussion today as to how are we going to find the funds to develop that, and the whole PPP argument that can we leverage the private sector working with government to get that facility upgraded, because it's very difficult for government to come up with those funds at this time. Yeah?
What I'm saying is our land space, though.
Yeah, there is a design
Sorry,
that will
just-
adequately go
we're
many
a
years
bit short
forward,
on
yeah.
time, so if we could just jump to the next question. Thanks.
There he is.
Hi, good morning all. I'm Richard Smith, the Director General of Civil Aviation, and I participated in this forum because we do recognize that airports, air transport is a key to our success, our tourism, our finance industry, everything that happens here. And I just need to clarify the position of the Civil Aviation Authority. It is often said, well, civil aviation is responsible for some of the things that happen. Whilst we are supportive in every aspect, not just for the airports, there is the Cayman Islands Airports Authority that is responsible for development and management of the airports. We are the regulatory body, and of course we support that authority in their efforts because we do recognize the importance. As Tristan reflected, at one time we were a part of the development and management of airports back in 2002. We did the first master plan. Tristan was a big part of that. But I just wanted to highlight some of the issues. I think we all know the problems. We all know the shortcomings, and we're looking for answers. But I just recently attended a conference in Panama with the Caribbean and Latin American airlines and some of the other regulatory authorities. And the aviation infrastructure is recognized as one of the main drivers of the economies of the region, both Caribbean and Latin America. So I don't think that any of us haven't identified that as the issue, but there's so many options for dealing with it, whether it's through PPP or whatever, and I think this discussion should bring some of those things forward. So I'll be around for the rest of it and hope I can contribute more as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add something quickly here?
You please do.
You know, one in the planning of our hospital project, which we'll do a little presentation on shortly, one of the single largest considerations or concerns was the airport and restriction of the airport, because it is a medical tourism project. And however, what we believe is if the funds that are taken in from the revenue that the airport generates is properly used, it can support an expansion over a period of time that will accommodate our project and many more. But it is a significant barrier to entry for any major development. The airport, the current airport, I think the current airport, Mr. Smith can correct me, is about 30% over its design capacity.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The airport and perhaps the port stick out as the two assets that are really in dire need. I mean, the lady here asked when's the right time. It was probably 10, 15 years ago. How do we get there? I think that's really comes from the discussion around it sounds like we probably have the right regulation or sufficient regulation. It's now about process. And the reality is, certainly in my view, we won't get there unless we involve some kind of private sector participation in terms of finance and expertise. Okay, as we're short on time, I'll just ask Jean if you would to give us your presentation on the health city.
No, just sit here.
Sorry?
Where's it come out over there?
I think you move the slides by clicking those arrows on the side.
I don't know. I just might as well sit here.
Oh, there you go.
It's fairly tight.
I've been given a very short period of time. I was asked to speak on a couple of things or discuss a couple of points. One of them is developing talent, and unfortunately the Developing Talent Forum is going on at the same time, and to discuss infrastructure. you know, again, when we were planning this project, infrastructure was a very significant issue. Cayman has a very strong base infrastructure, but if you to do a major development, there are very significant impacts that will be had. So I'll actually run through the presentation, and when I get to the actual infrastructure part, I'll spend a few minutes to discuss some of the things that we're doing to mitigate. As over the last 3 years, steps have been taken to create an environment that will allow medical tourism to operate in Cayman. Some of the steps are, obviously, we've signed the agreement in April 2010. Consultation with the medical society has been carried out. Necessary legislative changes have been enacted, all but one. Extensive community consultations and consultation with the business sector has revealed strong support. Medical tourism facts, we will build 2,000 beds over 15 years. Hospital will be a super specialty tertiary care hospital or facility. The market will cater primarily to medical tourists seeking inexpensive state-of-the-art health care. Healthcare costs have dramatically increased, and patients and employers will seek other more economical options for advanced treatment. We know that the Affordable Health Care Act is going to be a big bone to us in Cayman. Healthcare is one of the fastest growing industries as the world's population experiences rapid growth. First phase will commence late 2012 and will be operational late 2013. I'll just go through this quickly because obviously this was designed for the other forum. Medical education is a rapidly growing industry, and as the demand for healthcare grows, an integral part of Health City is a medical college, nursing college, allied training institute are all included in the project. With the implementation of the Affordable Care Act in the U.S., there will be a shortage of approximately 50,000 doctors and 200,000 nurses. This shortage is already starting to be felt and will continue for the next 2 decades. Health City anticipates the start of our educational program within 2 years, which will support the hospital staffing requirements as well as a general medical program. The education program will include medical, nursing, allied health, and administrative aspects of the medical field. Again, biotech research and development will be a part of the medical education program. We anticipate the initial phase of our medical education will have between 300 and 500 students. We will work with the Ministry of Education to develop a comprehensive program that will complement the needs of the island. We will work with schools to encourage, we will work with schools to encourage students to consider the medical field as a career. A medical education in healthcare field will provide another option for Caymanians choosing a life path. The healthcare field can provide a personal and professionally rewarding career. This is a kind of a stark statistic. I put it up so that it's out there publicly. The total healthcare industry in Cayman currently employs some 1,300 people, period. That's including from administrative right down to the, healthcare area. What we are trying to do is, what has become very clear to us is that it is going to be a challenge when we start to find suitable, our trained and educated Caymanians for this field. We've actually spent quite a lot of time with HSA, and we've spent some time with the Synico and some of the other medical providers. And what is very clear to us is that there's a shortage of medical professionals in general in Cayman, hence the advancement of our education system. But let me just go through the numbers quickly. We expect that when we open next year, we'll have 3 Cayman doctors, 10 nurses, 10 support staff, and 10 technical staff. We wish that there was a better picture, but we didn't want to put anything that's fluff. We wanted to put something that we believe is real. However, we believe that in 2014 that we'll see a bit of an increase to 4 doctors, 15 nurses, 25 support staff, and 12 technical staff, and that will be due to the fact that we will have training as soon as we open within the hospital. However, a very encouraging number is when we're fully operational. We estimate we'll have about 90 Cayman doctors. We'll have about 900 Cayman nurses. We'll have about 693, again, support staff and about 693 technical staff. Just to give you an order of magnitude, our hospital, once we're fully operational, will hire between 9,000 and 10,000 people. That's in 15 years out. So we have our work cut out to educate and to find and train people, and we are committed to doing that to the point where we're actually going to try to start a temporary medical school as early as next year. Infrastructure. As with any large-scale development, we recognized early on that the project would have to carefully consider infrastructure, addressing the issue as a priority. The following are areas, goodness gracious, sorry. The following are areas where progress is being made with close consultation and support from the government. SWAC. SWAC is a relatively new technology. It's saltwater air conditioning. Air conditioning on a commercial building is generally between 50 and 70% of your operating cost, your electrical operating cost. So we plan to implement SWAC technology. Basically what you do is you send a pipe down 3,000 feet and you pump cold water up and you use that for cooling the building. It is an extremely green technology, very well recognized. So that is something that we're actually planning to do. We're actually moving forward with the regulatory part of that now. And we do not expect to implement that until phase 2 of the project, which will be sometime in 2015. A byproduct of SWAC is it's a tremendous amount of water. So we plan to use the SWAC byproduct water as for non-potable uses such as irrigation, washing and flushing of toilets, and so on. Again, these are both infrastructure mitigation techniques. I don't know what happened to that one. Oops. Oh, we have something here. I don't know what happened. We had there's a slide that's actually missing, I think. Okay. As the hospital grows, one of the things that we recognized earlier on would be the need to extend the bypass road up to East End. And we've committed to work closely with government in phasing of the hospital. In fact, when we decided to build a hospital, we'd actually discussed with government about building it, the whole project, in 8 to 10 years. And what we actually found out is that the infrastructure would not be able to support the hospital, so we actually pushed it out to 15 years to allow revenue streams supported by the hospital to allow the requisite spending on infrastructure to support the hospital. The bypass, there's a proposed bypass, a first gazette of the bypass just to the north and through the north part of our property, and that has been incorporated into our master plan as a part of the long-term plan. Another significant issue is trash, garbage, which is a hot topic today, and I see my friend Mark Vandervelde down there. One of the things that we're actually trying to mitigate on this issue is medical waste and bio-waste. Currently, we have one incinerator on the island. It's about 38 years old, and it is horrendously expensive to operate, and it doesn't meet the requisite standards. So what we're actually in discussions, in fact in negotiations with government to do, is install a modern state-of-the-art incinerator that can incinerate medical waste streams. It will also be a redundant incinerator in the event the one that the current landfill fails or whatever. Again, this would significantly reduce our waste load. It also reduces transportation of bio-waste along the streets. In Roberts Airport, we actually had a specific part of our agreement that addressed this, and we spent quite a lot of time working with government on this. And this in Roberts Airport and the road program were the two areas that forced us to make to extend the duration of the project out to 15 years. We've been in consultation with the government. We've given them our flows. We've provided them our study. And you know, in our first year of operation, we anticipate that we will have about 70 medical tourists per day. This after first year of operation. And over the 15 years, we anticipate that will go up to about 2,500 patients a day. If you put that into numbers, that basically more than doubles our current stayover tourism load. It's a very significant number. In fact, it takes it up to about a million people inbound per year, which is a very significant number. Sewage, we've committed as a part of our planning application that we will handle and treat all sewage on site. We will use the effluent of sewage for irrigation, reducing the need for water as the water demand. And I think that we're going to use a very high standard so that basically it's just one step below potable water. And then another area that we've actually looked at and had discussions, in fact we've discussed this with CUC, is the use of solar has been carefully reviewed and is a viable option for off-the-grid power. However, the current legislation does not permit large-scale use of solar. So we're obviously, you know, if legislation changes, it'll be something that we will work toward. If not, then we will continue on with our other initiatives. Just to summarize what we're doing, we're building a 140-bed in the first phase, 107,000 square feet on 2 floors. It's an efficient operational design. Careful consideration given to the requirements of medical tourists. It is designed to JCI standards, which is the worldwide international standard. We'll have backup in water and power supply. We will offer cardiology, cardiac surgery, and orthopedics and joint replacements. And that is our artist rendering of our first phase plan. And I'm very proud to say that on Wednesday, we actually submitted the first pad approval submission to government for our first 100 acres, which is about a $2.5 billion development. That was actually submitted to government, including our plans for the first phase of our hospital, our structural plans and our building control plans. And this is a copy of the master plan, which will become public today, actually. And as you can see, you know, we've made significant, in this development, we've actually considered everything, including our internal road structure, to minimize impact on the roads. We've created our spline road that will eventually tie into the bypass as it goes further north. We have an entire service area to handle things such as sewage, SWAC, and all the other utilities, incineration, and so on. And this is our site as of yesterday. And we're moving. Thank you very much. And again, now, I just wanted to say this before I close. We don't have all of the answers by any means for dealing with infrastructure. But what we are doing is we're really making a concerted effort to figure out how we can minimize infrastructure, how we demand, how we can bring that in-house and handle it ourselves. And it's one thing that became very evident to us, it is not complex, it's very simple, and it's very basic. It becomes economics. What we actually found is some of these mitigating green or sustainable technologies or infrastructure mitigations actually became solid economic business cases for our project. So, you know, I encourage, again, as we move Cayman forward, we can look at these as opportunities instead of demanding infrastructure, supporting infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Gene. I think watching that, sometimes there's a tendency to get a bit cynical about new ideas and new projects. I must say, watching that and from what I've heard in the past, that, you know, it's exciting, and as it happens and as it progresses, it could be transformative for Cayman. So very exciting. In fact, I guess I'll ask a quick question and then open it up to the audience to ask any of the panel questions. But in your presentation, Jean, you outlined some of the key infrastructure requirements for this project, and it seems to me that we potentially have a bit of a chicken and egg situation, which isn't unusual in that this project and equally a number of other major projects that may be happening in Cayman require certain things, that require an upgrade of the airport. I mean, the current capacity of the airport is probably half what would be needed, if that. The road network equally needs development. In what way can the health city assist? Because it seems clear to me that as things stand, there isn't the finance available. How could health city help unlock that?
I mean, I think what we have done, and again, we've provided fairly specific information. And the biggest way that we can help doing this, number one is commit and get the project done. Because it is impossible for government to go and build an airport and say, okay, now come and do the development. You have to have the revenue streams ahead of time. Our biggest commitment is to build it in a time frame that allows the revenue flows to keep up with the demand. In other words, if we tried to build this in 8 or 10 years, it wouldn't have worked. We've had to build it over a long period of time. And quite frankly, the figures show that if and I'm treading on tender ground here, but if resources, financial resources are handled in the correct manner, there will not be a challenge financially to develop the airport or develop the roads. And again, we provided that to government in our economic analysis. There becomes the challenge is making sure that the funds are properly allocated by the government or by the authorities. And I think that is the biggest assistance we can give is through scaling it in a time and period that allows it to be successful. And I will say, you know, one of the things that we took a decision on earlier on is that we got some significant concessions, no questions about it. But our concessions were pay-as-you-go concessions. In other words, if we didn't bring in medical equipment and supplies, we got no concessions. We did not ask for a nickel concessions in infrastructure fees, building fees, or any of those types of fees, because we realized that those are the fees that support the infrastructure. In fact, we delivered a check yesterday to government for $165,000. That's half of our fees. The other half is due when we move forward. So, hope that answers.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
Tristan, go ahead.
I just looking at it, I think there's a couple of things. One, obviously, there's a lot of detail or planning that has gone into that, and you know, from the outside, if you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, you'd expect it to happen quite quickly, and so I think this shows that, you know, it has to take time to develop. Developers, they can, you know, it's I don't want to say it's about the bottom line, but it is in most instances, yeah. Right? So in that respect, they sort of want it as quick as possible. But you know, I think I'm going to flip the script a little here too, because I think, and this is a product of our success. We have long just expected government to just deliver the infrastructure to everything. And in other countries, you know, that's not how it happens. I mean, I know in San Diego, they wanted to build a new stadium, and they got to move they got to move an entire train station. They got to build a highway to it. They got to do all kind of stuff to get that stadium there. And obviously there are concessions, but there are other funding as well. So I think it's a challenge to the private sector and the developers that want these large projects to see how they can help put that infrastructure in place.
That's an interesting point. I mean, one as you speak, one area that springs to mind is something that's being used elsewhere a bit is tax incremental financing. So where for example, we see the development fees, the infrastructure fees coming in at some point in the future. How can we use those future revenues to upgrade the road system, the airport, and what have you? I mean, I'll put that question to Mr. Swarbrick. Is that the kind of transaction, the kind of process that you think makes sense? Or?
You have to look at the specifics and the details. I think you have to be innovative. You have to look at the potential options. Obviously, there's the risks and rewards. You got to look at that equation in terms of looking at how you go forward. I think you should count nothing in and count nothing out. And I think you look at what the best option is available to you. I think in looking at the whole perspective of infrastructure, a key issue here is there's a political dimension here, and trying to get the political realities all lined up to agree to a national infrastructure plan or something like that, so that we know what the key priorities are for the country, and that everybody can sign up to that and look at the way forward, so that you don't get, and it happens in every country, new administrations come in, they change their priorities, change how they want to do things. You know, you need to make sure that you can try and build some consensus around areas like that, so you can actually move forward and have a long-term infrastructure plan which could be actually implemented effectively.
Thank you. So we have time for some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I'd like to start with a question. The last session is going to be talking about a national development of a national infrastructure plan. For the panel for this session, I'd like to ask, we collect millions of dollars every year in various, what I consider segregated funds. We have a roads fund, among other things. Are those funds being used for the purpose for which they are collected? If they are not, why aren't they being used? And shouldn't that be used as the basis for a long-term national infrastructure plan for road development?
You go first on that one. So.
No, I insist. I insist.
They're not my funds, I just audit them.
I would imagine it would make sense for you to take point on that, Alistair.
If they're legally required to be used for certain purposes, they should be, and they should be treated as restricted funds, and they should be used for the purposes that they're intended for. That is the case. If they're, even if they're not actually, if that's the intention of trying to do an effective planning for future infrastructure projects or whatever funds you're using for, it makes complete sense that you're using those funds and designating them for certain purposes, that they're not used for something else. But then obviously the realities do kick in. I think it's well known that for example, there's cash flow issues within government at this present moment in time, you know. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, but, you know, and I hope I don't speak out of turn here, but, you know, some of those funds, it's not that they're not being used appropriately, it's just that, you know, for many years they're underfunded. You know, I can't remember the fees for the planning and stuff now, but, you know, take for instance, and this is not really infrastructure, but it's something on my plate, the traffic. I mean, you haven't had an increase in traffic fees from 1997 or something like that. I mean, you know, we've just been cruising along, and back, you know, I'd say in the 90s and early 2000s, when the economy was good and there was a lot of money being generated, those fees, it was, I wouldn't say acceptable, but it was taken for granted that those fees could remain the same and provide what it had to provide. But when, you know, when the crunch time comes and you really look at things, there's a lot of those funds that, you know, you're charging, I don't know, 15 cents a square foot for a building or something, that you were doing it 20 years ago. Is that really appropriate? And can that sustain the infrastructure that it was designed to sustain?
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, the reality is even if these segregated funds were spent solely on the purpose identified, where the revenue generation levels have been set, in many cases it would only be sufficient to maintain the road network. So what do you do when you need a new highway? Well, you need to innovate. I think is probably the answer. Any other questions from the audience?
Gentlemen, PMFL, if it was implemented rather than being held up, your time management, and the various programs that are in the PMFL and the Public Management Finance Law, the accrual accounting system, by its very nature, attributes costs and income, cost-benefit analysis. All of that would be possible to really analyze what the costs are, the true costs, the anticipated costs, the future costs, the budget costs, the actual costs. However, that has been stymied because certain people don't want to really know. Certain industries mightn't want to really know, so that you can assess the infrastructure fees. I'd like to find out if you would agree that that may be part of the problem, is that the systems that we have that are in law, and also, would you agree that maybe back in the 1990s, when we were told that our economy was in a debt spiral because we're not funding for infrastructure, has proved to be correct?
Well, before passing that hot potato on once again, I've read the PMFL and the more recent FFR, and I think that actually within that there's quite a lot of sensible policy, the regulation. There's, for example, there's provision for I guess a capital project appraisal committee. I mean, that's the kind of thing that would really make sense. It's in some ways perhaps it's over-engineered as a piece of legislation for an island of this size, and I can see how it would be very difficult to implement in its entirety. But there is, to my mind, there's some sensible stuff in there. Having made that point, I'll pass on to perhaps to Max initially. Just what are your views on that?
I mean, the business case thing is critical. I'm a firm believer in any project having a proper business case, full evaluation of that business case, and proof that that project is needed and appropriate before it proceeds. So in terms of the business case and what the FFR now states, I think that gives some support to business cases on projects to be thoroughly evaluated and move ahead. So I'm a firm believer in the whole business case side of things, without a doubt. I'm not sure I'm answering the original question.
Are we doing that enough in terms of defining a business case at the outset? I think I know the response.
From my perspective, we don't really see much in terms of business cases. There's no clear, doesn't clearly set out the cost benefits, the risks, the objectives, what's trying to be achieved, and I think that's the fundamental issue, is that they need to have a clear business case, which is a clear assessment of how you're going to forward, and also included in that sort of things like procurement strategies, how you will procure the service, the infrastructure, the assets.
Sorry. No, I was going to say there's a clear need to do a better job on the business cases, looking at the life cycle costs of the projects, not just the initial capital cost of the project. I think that's an area we need to do more in.
And I think probably our best example of that is the GOAP, the Government Office Accommodation Project. I mean, that went through all of its stages, including a business case, and it looked at various sites. It did everything, life cycle analysis, and that's why it was so successful. I mean, just on the life cycle analysis alone, I mean, we are right on the numbers of what it was supposed to generate. As we bring people in, we've seen the costs go up, and we can measure it according to that life cycle. But no, it hasn't been done in the past. But I'm not going to cry over spilled milk either. It's time you learn from it, and we are doing it now.
The GAAB clearly worked well.
Yes.
Was something different there? I mean, for example, was the civil service more empowered in that instance to take hold of that?
No, I just think we had Max, Tristan, Jim Scott.
We had the A team on that one.
Just a general comment on the PMFL and the FFR is that the PMFL, there's lots of good stuff in there. It probably is over-engineered, overly complex, particularly for a country of this size. And in terms of the FFR, a lot of that is just good practice at the end of the day. There's nothing, no rocket science in a lot of that stuff. It's just good practice in terms of finance, procurement, PPP, everything, project management. And that's just, those are the important cruxes to try and move
There's nothing
forward.
controversial in there that you wouldn't expect. I mean,
I'm not going to talk about the limits for approval and things like that, but just generally the other stuff around, there's nothing controversial. It's just standard good practice for project management, contracting, and procurement.
thanks.
Just to say, with procurement and with project management, et cetera, just to put it in context for government scope, it's not just building buildings or procuring consultancy services. It's also projects for the welfare of the country and the people of the country. So, and the AG and I have had many long discussions about this, about business cases and whatnot, and what constitutes an appropriate business case for those softer or more ambiguous projects. So it's just to put some context, not everything will have a hard and fast business case that says, if we spend this much, we'll get this much. This guarantees value for money here. But I mean, the founding principles of understanding the total scope of the project, understanding what resources and expertise you need and you have, and acquiring those that you don't have, and then establishing what you want to achieve and being transparent throughout the process, I think, is the most important steps there.
I think it's important to note that when we talk about value for money, it's just not about getting the most economic project. It is about delivering your economic, your overall policy aims, your social objectives, and that might initially be the cheapest option, but it might be the most effective for driving forward the country and more. So you have to think about it in wider terms of just cents and dollars.
Okay, I think we're out of time now, so I just wanted to obviously thank the panel, brave members of the panel, for stepping up on this topic, and our sponsors. I won't run through them again, but you all know who they are, and they have their booths outside. So thanks once again. Cheers.